And now on the line is Alasdair Allan. Alasdair is a Scottish National Party member of the Scottish Parliament for the h-Eileanan. Alasdair, welcome back to Near FM.
Nice to see you again.
Okay, this is our second interview on Near FM. Alasdair, I last spoke to you in late 2020. I got in touch with you in 2020 to do an interview mainly to hear about you and your party's views on Scottish independence and Scots Gaelic, and I am interested in your constituency also, given that you, I believe, represent most of the native Scottish speakers, Gaelic Scottish speakers in Scotland. Anyway, I got in touch with you to this interview again today to talk about the same two things, as there has been some movement on the question of Scottish independence recently, and I know that there is ongoing work to promote Scots Gaelic in Scotland also. Could you start off, Alasdair, and this might be a big question, but can you start off by telling me how you and your party see the situation in Scotland at this time with a new referendum on Scottish independence planned next year? And can you give me some kind of an idea of what you think is on the cards in the medium term in relation to Scottish independence?
Well, it is a big question in Scottish politics, and at the last elections to the Scottish Parliament in 2021, that election produced a Parliament where there was a majority of members who were in favour of Scottish independence and in favour of having a referendum on Scottish independence. So there is a democratic question that the UK government has to answer if they want to stand in the way. It's an unresolved question as to where the powers lie to hold a referendum, because last time in 2014 the referendum took place with agreement, or by agreement with the UK government. But one of the last acts of Boris Johnson in office was to write to us to tell us that he wouldn't come to a similar agreement this time round, that he wouldn't offer any kind of cooperation with a referendum that we would hold on an issue of independence. So the Scottish Government have paid, anticipating that, but we are happy to test the issue of where the power lies now in the Supreme Court, and to establish, does Scotland have the power to organise such a referendum without the involvement of the UK government? And that's where we'll go next. We want to have a referendum that's legal. We want to have a referendum that will lead to a constitutional path to independence. But the democratic point is we have a mandate, and by that I don't just mean my party, but the Parliament and the people of Scotland have elected the Parliament to do this, and we're determined to make sure that that is carried out.
Okay, I believe many of the opinion polls in recent months show that yourselves in the SNP and supporters for Scottish independence in general have a big challenge to convince more people to vote for independence. Do you agree with that?
Well, the referendum in 2014 had 45% voting for independence, which is much higher support for independence than at any time previously expressed in the past before that. The opinion polls have fluctuated a bit since then. There was an opinion poll last week that suggested 51% were now in favour of independence. The opinion polls, for instance, in the run-up to the last referendum in 2014, had independence sitting about 30% at the beginning of the campaign. So these things move, and when people campaign, and then they move, and we're determined to win that campaign. What we've also said is that if we are told that we can't organise a referendum in Scotland under our own steam, without the involvement of the UK government, then the next elections to the UK Parliament in Scotland will inevitably turn into a referendum on the question of us having that right to freedom, and will inevitably turn into a referendum about that. So there are several stages ahead of us, but we're determined to make sure that what the people voted for, which was to have that choice, is the choice that the people get.
It must be very encouraging and positive for you, is that I believe that the opinion polls for a long time generally say that the clear majority of people under the age of 50 in Scotland support independence, don't they?
Yeah, there's a very clear association, the distinction rather, between how people in 2014 certainly voted on grounds of age. I see some evidence now that suggests that for people in their their teens and 20s and 30s, the support for independence may well be as high as 70%. So there is a generation of people growing up for whom the existence of a Scottish Parliament is normal, the existence of a distinctive Scottish politics is normal, and we also see that Scotland's needs are only really going to be met from the institutions we have, and Scotland has the power to change things in Scotland in a bigger way and in more areas for the better in the future. So, yeah, there is a definite support amongst young people.
Okay, as I said to you at the start of the interview, I want to talk a bit about Scots Gaelic, but just before we talk about that, today is Thursday, we're talking on Near FM. The interview will be broadcast on Sunday, but today is the day that Boris Johnson resigned as Prime Minister of the UK. Do you want to just say something about that?
Well, yeah, it's a pathetic end to, I think by all accounts, a pretty pathetic Prime Minister, although he does intend to stay on in office, it would seem, for some weeks, potentially months, until the Conservative Party can agree on who his successor should be. I think it's going to be a very fragile government in the weeks ahead, if that's really what he intends to do. And I do think that the next Prime Minister, whoever that is, will have to answer this question that we put to Boris about the referendum, and the question about Scotland's future is not going to go away in case the new Prime Minister thinks that. But certainly we throughout have expressed, as a Scottish Government, have expressed our increasing frustration, not just at the scandals that have engulfed the UK Government, but at the UK Government's hostile attitude towards Scotland and its dismissiveness towards people's ambitions in Scotland for the future.
And for Irish people, there's the whole question of the Northern Ireland Protocol. And I believe that in the UK, across the UK, for the last about 10 years, you have a lot of austerity, don't you?
I didn't quite hear the last question.
I believe because of the Conservative governments, you have a lot of austerity, do you?
Yes, the Conservative government in the UK has provided, certainly in the initial part of the government, over a policy of austerity, but what they've done more recently than that is they've proved to be a stumbling block, they've proved to be an obstacle in the way of Scotland's ambitions. And I don't just mean ambitions about our plans for independence, I mean an obstacle in the way of many things that we'd like to do if we had more powers to tackle poverty, to tackle the problems that there are in our economy. And particularly at a time when there's a cost of living crisis, I think many people in Scotland question why it is that so many of these areas of policy should be in the hands of a government in London, given that the last time we actually voted in Scotland for that party was in 1955.
Okay, we could talk about this all day, but we move on. We haven't got all day to talk, so we move on to talk about a bit about Gaelic. I read of two developments in relation to Scottish Gaelic on social media in the last few months. One recently in relation to some kind of a household survey that was carried out, which had a question or questions on Gaelic. And the second news I read goes back a couple of months, but it was about a very interesting language plan Glasgow City Council are preparing to promote Scots Gaelic in Glasgow. Alasdair, could you give me a bit of a summary on how you see the situation with Scots Gaelic in Scotland in recent months and years?
Well, there's certainly a renewed interest in Scottish Gaelic, both in areas like my own, where there's still a big number of people who are native speakers of the language, and also in the cities, for instance, where there's a renewed interest. You mentioned Glasgow, a renewed interest in the growth, for instance, of Gaelic medium education. Gaelic remains a language in a fragile condition, it must be said. There are 60,000 people who can speak the language, and I think in recent months the debate has not so much been about how many can speak the language, but how many actually have the opportunity to use the language, and who feel that they want to use the language and they want to see a future for it in their own family, for instance. So there's a lot to be done for Gaelic, but there's a lot happening. There's a lot of support for the Gaelic language, but we just need to make sure that Gaelic, whether it's in Gaelic schools in the cities, or whether it's in the very fragile communities that are represented in the islands, that Gaelic has that future.
One big area of interest of mine in Ireland in relation to the Irish language, and it's not an interest shared by many people. Most people don't care, I don't think, but it's the issue of Irish language and bilingual signage. That's a big area of the future for Scots Gaelic in Scotland as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, until the 1980s, you would never see Gaelic, until the 1990s probably, you would never see Gaelic on any road sign in Scotland, and people had to protest for the right for there to be Gaelic road signs. I think people sometimes forget here. It sometimes erupts in the press as a supposed issue of controversy that place names, which in most cases are in fact Gaelic place names, appear in their original Gaelic form on some road signs. So occasionally that still erupts as an issue of controversy, but I think most people understand why they're there. It's beginning, as I say, to become more mainstream in some parts of Scotland, and I think people are more accepting and understanding of why they're there than they were in the past. But it's only a small bit of Gaelic language policy, but it's an important bit because it means that the Gaelic language is visible. People see it's there, people ask about it. People get to think about it more.
And I believe that, to talk there about Glasgow City Council, to their next language plan, I think maybe, I'm not sure, but other councils could be preparing language plans as well. So it's not just, in the future, it's not just going to be road signs. You're going to have a lot more bilingual signs in general. Is that the case, is it?
So it will vary from local authority to local authority. Different places will have their own different language plans. There's not the same expectations across the whole of the country. More and more public authorities are taking out, are putting together Gaelic language plans under the Gaelic Language Act that exists in Scotland. There's the prospect of another language bill in the future to try and strengthen some of that. I would hope to see the public sector, for instance, embracing Gaelic in a way that it hasn't done historically. So I would certainly welcome more legislation in that area.